Hi, I'm Noel Kingsbury, and with my colleague Annie Guilfoyle, we run Garden Masterclass, which we started 5 years ago to do educational workshops for garden and landscape people in the British Isles.
Hello, and I'm Annie Guilfoyle. We still do live events, in-person events all over the British Isles and also into Europe, in fact. But since COVID happened globally, we now have an online program and we do webinars as well. So we are now a global garden community.
All our information-packed webinars are recorded and they're available from our website. They're pay to view, but members get a discount.
And this is a recording of our weekly public service broadcast that we like to call our Thursday Garden Chat. It goes out at 6 o'clock on a Thursday live, and that's 6 o'clock UK time. We talk to people from all over the world, designers, gardeners, horticulturalists, nursery people, botanists. And so it's always a great range of people and always very exciting.
We've got recordings here on YouTube, but masses more on our website, and our members will have access to even more. In fact, we've got hundreds of hours on our online library.
And take a look at our website and see what's coming up on our diary pages. Everything is listed in the diary, so webinars, live events, everything that we do, it's all in a chronological order, and you can click through to a link to get in more information or to buy tickets. And you may want to sign up for a monthly newsletter, our mailing list, or you might like to become a member.
We do these weekly events for free, as indeed do our speakers, but we have costs, which is why we really appreciate donations, and you can make donations from our homepage.
Well, we really hope that you enjoyed this recording, and please come back and try. So this week I've been at Chelsea and I'm going to talk about my views and experience at Chelsea, and I want to stress that these are my views, personal views, not my views as a judge necessarily, because I was judging. So it's kind of the things that I have picked up and the things that I gravitated towards and the things that I found really interesting, and I hope that you will too. So of course, do tap questions into the question box. I'm sure there'll be a little bit of lively debate at the end. Chelsea generally always creates a bit of a debate. So I'm going to go into screen share and hopefully, right, let's just see, it's difficult to get to the controls when you are running the show. Okay, so, all right, brilliant. So if for any reason there's something wrong, please put in the chat box. I'm assuming everyone can see the first slide. If there's any kind of, you're nodding, aren't you, Wendy? You can see it. Yeah, great. Okay, so if there's I don't know, it's a big file, and so I'm just hoping that as I change the slides, you know, I won't start talking about a slide that's coming up, but I think because it's a big file, that could happen. But hopefully you will be able to sort of tell me if that's the case. Anyway, so I'm just going to move things around a little bit and get going. Just bear with me a second. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so as I said, I'm talking about Chelsea from my perspective. I spent 3 days there, Saturday, Sunday and Monday, because I was invited to be a judge again. So yeah, so this isn't, I'm not telling tales out of school. I'm not sort of saying, this is what the judges said about this, that and the other. So it very much is from, like I say, from my perspective. So but I will talk about the judging procedure because I think it is important and interesting, hopefully to some of you. So what we're looking at here is my my kit, my high vis, my boots that are obligatory before the show starts. You've all got to wear you know, hard steel toe cap boots, and also of course my show pass. So Now, if let's just see, okay, right. So let's get going. Let's get going. So this gentleman here, he's very important. I can't remember his name, which is really sad. But this is a chap who sits in the showground in his truck, and as you can see behind him is a map of the showground. And for 3 weeks, because the show, the show starts to be built at the very beginning of May. So there's a 3-week very intense build up, and this gentleman here who's very important, you can see he's got his tea beside him and he's got his high vis on. He is basically organizing the traffic and the traffic flow around Chelsea, which is, as you can imagine, it's not a very big site. I think it's only a few acres. I want to say about 7 acres or so, but it's not a massive site. So when you're there during the show, you think it's huge, but when you see it as a park, it's really not huge at all. So during the build-up, this guy is very important to keep everybody safe, basically. And of course, I wanted to put in a few shots of the build-up. Now, obviously, I was only there from Saturday afternoon. And by Saturday afternoon, they're kind of expecting everybody to be, certainly the gardens to be finished. But the marquee is a hive of activity. And because obviously, if they don't want the marquee to be constructed and put together too early, because otherwise, the flowers are going to go over. So, what you're seeing is this sort of intensive work going on. And then, of course, the camera crews, the BBC have got the license, if you like, to film at Chelsea. And so they're going around and filming and doing a lot of the pre-filming stuff. So almost everywhere, are cameras and camera crews the whole time. So, it is a hive of activity. And, here, this is sort of Saturday afternoon stroke evening in the marquee. There are teams and teams of people preparing their stands, preparing their flower stands. And I think I'm right in saying that I think in the marquee there were 79 stands, which is amazing. And of course, this is happening outside too. This is Darren Hawkes watering the garden. I'll talk a bit more about his garden in a minute, so don't worry. But once the gardens are built, it's very important that they're kept looking good. Now this year the weather has been, I know it's very wet during build up, but now it's sunny and not too hot. So in terms of show week, that's quite agreeable, really. So it's not, sometimes it's either raining like mad or it's really, really hot, which is unpleasant for people visiting as well as the show plants. And you might not think that you hoover gardens, but actually, these two guys here are actually hoovering this garden. This is the Korean garden. Extraordinary work of art, this garden. Absolutely. This is Jihei's garden. It was absolutely amazing creation. And these guys are literally hoovering the garden, which I think is, funny as I pass by. So this is all happening over the weekend. This is kind of Saturday afternoon going into Sunday. Again, back in the marquee, the plants are being wheeled in. Some of them are under wraps, keeping them cool, because remember the show is up for almost a week. It finishes on Saturday, so it's really, really got to stay the course, really, and the plants have got to look good, and especially good for judging, because that's what everybody's kind of geared up to. And as I mentioned, the old camera crews here are taking lots and lots of preliminary shots and preliminary interviews from the word go. So you've really got to kind of watch when you're walking around. You're either going to have, a big camera crew behind you or a lorry dropping something off, or you've really got to have your wits about you. As I say, it's a hive of activity. Now, what was I doing there? Well, I am in my 3rd year of being a judge, invited to be a judge, and I'll explain about the judging process. And this is what I was judging, not just me. We were a team, the balcony and container garden. So as a judge, every year you're moved around because of those of you who are not familiar with Chelsea, there are different categories. So there's show gardens, which are the main, what we call main avenue, the big gardens, the sanctuary gardens, which are the slightly smaller gardens along the top of the site, balcony and container gardens. There's indoor plants, which they call the plant studio. There's the marquee and all the growers. And there's also the plants, sort of the smaller gardens in the marquee, which come under a category of all about plants. And so this is the category that I was judging this year. Last year I was on Main Avenue. I'm very pleased I wasn't on Main Avenue this year, because my goodness me, what a job they had. And so I'll just explain how the judging works. So the judging team comprises of 3 judging assessors, and I'll explain what they do in a minute, 4 other judges and 1 moderator. So what happens on the Saturday is the 3 judging assessors go around the show, or the category that they're judging. So in this case, the balcony and container gardens, and they make notes, and they take preliminary marking of against each of the categories. Now, there's about 9 criteria that every garden has to sort of that we're judging on, and that's from things like ambition to design, 3D design, 2D design, planting associations, quality of plants, ambition, theatre, all of that. So about 9 criteria, and in each of those criteria we are judging from excellent to poor, and each of those stages from between excellent and poor have numbers assigned to them. So they each have numbers, and obviously whatever you're marking, whichever category you're saying, is it excellent, poor, is it good, is it very good, the marks add up. So when the assessors go around, they're doing this together as a threesome. That's on Saturday. Us other judges go around independently on the Saturday afternoon, and we make our own notes, and we also do the same thing. So we also go through all of these criteria, and we mark it according to what we think. And that's on the Saturday. And then on the Sunday, we all meet together at the crack of dawn, and we go around as a group. And then we are comparing what the assessors have said with what the rest of the judging crew have said. And obviously, I remember I said there's a moderator there. So the moderator is keeping an eye on the fact that you're being consistent. Obviously, we don't all agree all the time, and so we have to debate things, and that can take time. Now, we in this category were relatively lucky. We had, I think we had about 12 or 13, or about 12 maybe, gardens to judge. Main Avenue had the same, but remember, those gardens are so much bigger. These are relatively smaller. However, from the outset, I thought these would be quick to judge, but just because it's small doesn't mean that it's quick and easy to judge. In fact, it probably makes it harder in many respects. And so you try and give an allotted amount of time to each garden. You work through the criteria, and you compare your marks with the assessor's marks, and then you agree or disagree, and then these marks get added up, and then as at the bottom of each of the criteria we tally up the marks, and then that is indicating which level of medal the gardens are going to be. So if I just go on to the next, these are a few more of the balcony and container gardens, and so that's how the judging works. Now then we go back to the judging room, the meeting room, and we sit down, and we may revisit some, we may thrash out a little bit of things that we're not happy about, or do we want to re-look at one, do we want to re-evaluate things, do we feel that we've been fair and generous, or have we been fair across the board? And it's I think it's a very, very good system, and what you cannot do is, it's not about what you like or what you don't like. You can walk into a garden and you may not particularly like the garden yourself from a personal point of view, but that is irrelevant, because you're marking it against these criteria, but you're also marking it against the designer's brief. So every designer, no matter whether it's a balcony or container garden or one of the large show gardens, they've written a brief that they submit to the RHS panel when the garden is put in for, when they're applying for the garden to be at the show. And so if this is the crux of the matter, really, because everything is marked against the brief pretty much. So if the designer has said, I've designed this garden for a south facing spring garden, and they've put shade loving plants, woodland plants, and that are all predominantly autumn flowering, that's what we're looking at. What have they said? Have they done what they've said? And have they done what they've said well, and if so, what category? So the judging system was kind of given a bit of a facelift, and it's continually kind of changing and tweaking. But James Alexander Sinclair, I think, was fairly instrumental in pulling this together and making it quite robust. And so I think it's very fair. It's not easy being a judge. It's interesting. It's not that easy. But you know, and like I say, we do come up against you know, what we like and well, not what we like, but whether we agree or disagree with our fellow judges, and arguing the cause. So you have to do your homework. You have to be sure about, you know, the categories that you're judging, the plants that you're judging, and so on. So, you know, it's good. It's a very interesting system. So before I launch into the rest of the show, and my kind of the gardens that I was really drawn to at the show, I want to talk about Project Giving Back, because they are so relevant to the show. And now Project Giving Back, we have had them on Garden Masterclass, on Thursday Garden Chat. This is a charity. It's an organization set up by two private individuals, philanthropists, who basically are sponsoring 3 years at Chelsea, and over that 3 years, 42 gardens. So if you added up the cost of 42 gardens over 3 years, it's tens of millions of pounds, you know, I imagine, because not every garden obviously costs the same amount of money, but you can do the maths and you can average it out. It's a huge amount of money. And what they did is during COVID, they decided, or they thought the fact that a lot of charities are really suffering during and after COVID, because and the cost of living crisis, and how could they help charities? And so they came up with an idea of marrying charities up with designers to create gardens at Chelsea, to promote the charities. They're paying for the gardens, and it's giving the designers a leg up. Well, they're not all new and up and coming designers, because some of the designers are very well and long established, but you know, it's basically providing the money. So it is a phenomenal thing. I mean, and I think it's really made such a huge difference to Chelsea last year, this year, and then next year. What will happen after that, who knows? I don't think they will completely disappear off the scene, but I think things will change, and perhaps they will restructure, or they will become more of a consultancy, who knows? But I wanted to talk about this before I launch into the gardens, because a lot of the gardens, well, actually, as I said, there were 15 gardens that were sponsored by Project Giving Back this year. So a lot of the gardens were sponsored by them. And therefore, you know, the charity and the message of the charity is very prominent. So I'm going to go through some of the gardens, and you'll see that I've kind of homed in on a few gardens. You know, I set out thinking I would do a sort of complete round the show, and I would come back with all the different gardens. It's very, very difficult to do that, because even though it's not a huge footprint, there's a lot going on. And I was drawn to a certain number of gardens that I just kept coming back to, and just kept standing in front of and looking at for, you know, a long time. And at the end of this, you'll see the gardens that really spoke to me, and these are the ones that I'm going to talk to you about. So the first one is the Centrepoint Garden, designed by Cleve West, again sponsored by Project Giving Back. And at the bottom there you can see it's a gold medal winning garden, and it also won Best Construction. Now, Centrepoint is a charity in England, in London. That for those of you who are abroad, you might not have heard of Centrepoint. Those of you in the UK, you probably will very much heard of Centrepoint. And it was a charity started to help aid and assist young homeless people. Cleve West, as you all know, is a veteran designer at Chelsea. How many medals? I'm going to guess he's got about 11 gold medals, but it may even be 12. It might even be 13 now. A lot of gold medals. He hasn't been at Chelsea for many years, and he said he would never do Chelsea again. But of course, this came up. He wanted to do something for Centrepoint, and so he created this extraordinary derelict house and garden. Now I've started with this image because the image is focusing on the hearth, the hearth, the fire, the heart of the home. As you can see, it's been destroyed, but incredibly crafted. And I just want to point out again, this garden won Best Construction. Now this was a I'm not going to say controversial garden, but it's not your average Chelsea garden, and I'm going to be interested to hear what people think about it, what the general public think about it, because this again, here we are looking at the garden. It's rubble, it's weeds, it's pioneer plants. It looks like a derelict site that you might see somewhere in the edges of London or inner London, or and lots of symbolism about homelessness, about how nature heals, about how nature is coming back into this site and taking over the site. There was a lot of talk before Chelsea about weeds. This year there's going to be loads of weeds at Chelsea, and I'm not sure that has, I haven't been watching a lot of the TV coverage, but of course, in this garden there are a lot of weeds, but there are also cultivated plants. But Cleve's message is that nature is coming and it's healing. Again, some more images here, fallen trees, there was also little children's shoes tucked away, old tools. Again, it was one of these gardens that you could stand in front of. And of course, on Main Avenue, the gardens are long and thin. They're about 12 meters wide by about 20 meters long. Some of them were bigger this year. And so you could stand there at the sharp end, the short end, or the long end, and you could just stand and look for hours. And of course, being a judge and being there on press day, and I was lucky enough to go into the garden. Also, I went to school with Cleve West. We knew each other since we were kids, and so it was really nice to go in there and sort of spend some time in there with him and just talk to him about it. Also, in the garden, there's a little bit of soundscape going on, and there are noises from a home, sort of noises like clattering of cutlery and noises that you would have from a home, which are sort of slightly eerie in this setting, but very wonderful. So Cleve's garden, phenomenal, just a complete amazing creation. The next garden that I really spent a lot of time standing in front of and looking at was Darren Hawkes's garden, and it's called the Samaritan's Listening Garden. Again, sponsored by Project Giving Back. This one is Silver Gilt Medal. Now, in the UK, we have an organisation called the Samaritans. I think in the States you have it, but it's called something else, I believe. Wendy's nodding, so yeah. The Samaritans, I'm sure you've all heard of the Samaritans, but it's charity where it's for people to listen to people who need to talk to somebody. That's in its kind of broadest and most simplest sense. But obviously, we're talking about people who are desperate, probably, but not necessarily. They may have no one to talk to. And Darren, he was very upfront about why he wanted to do the Samaritan's Garden. He'd lost some friends to suicide, and so this meant a lot to him. Now, this was on press day, and this woman in this lovely green and red dress, her name is Felicity Vara Harding, and her father started the Samaritans charity 70 years ago. And it was extraordinary to meet her and just hear her talking about this incredible thing that we know exists, that's always been there. That's such an amazingly helpful charity. And Darren is also a listener for Samaritans. He lives in Cornwall, and he also is a volunteer. Now, the image on the right, there are children that Darren is explaining the garden to, and the message of the garden. Now, what was wonderful about Press Day this year is it was full of children. Now, one of the odd things at Chelsea is children have never been allowed into the show. Babies, small children, I can't remember what age it is that you're allowed in. It might be young teenage, but it's never been accessible to children during show week, which I think is questionable. I think that needs to be questioned. I can understand that buggies would be a nightmare, trying to push a pushchair around Chelsea during show week. I wouldn't want to do it. But children, I think up till now have felt excluded. Anyway, press day was full of children, and they were interacting with the gardens and doing activities on some of the gardens. And this is a group of school children, and Darren is explaining what the garden's about, the symbolism in the garden, and it was just wonderful to see so many young children there. This is a view into Darren's garden. Now, these layers of concrete he dug up from a friend's farm in Cornwall. This is an old cow yard. This is the base of an old concrete cow yard, and he dug this up. And he hung up these layers, if you like. So on one side of these it's smooth, and on the other side it's rough. And then he's cut all of these himself, cut the circle, and you can look through into it. And I just thought this was a very symbolic image, really, sort of looking deep into a garden and these multi-layers. Like I say, I could have stood for hours in front of this garden. You know, things hanging, sort of hanging by a thread, and it's a little bit difficult for you to see, but you can see on the right hand image there's the big sort of concrete, again rough on one side, smooth on the other, circle in the middle, and he's scored into this concrete these cracks that somebody has painted with gold leaf. So you can just about make this out. There's a sort of little gold, little sort of river of gold going through this cracked concrete. So a lot of symbolism, absolutely amazing. Yeah, I mean, you can see here now, you're standing back sort of looking at these layers of concrete from the side, hanging, the little stones hanging from threads, the planting, this beautiful sculptural female form that's called the listener. So yeah, just you know, again, I did find this garden very moving and very thoughtful. Then almost opposite is Tom Massey's garden, another Project Giving Back garden, you know, that was sponsored by Project Giving Back, and it was for the Royal Entomological Society, and it was all about insects and children and activity, and this structure you can see is like a compound eye. It's like the sort of insect's compound eye. So when you're underneath it, you've got the light coming through. When you're in there were microscopes set up. There was this screen showing you know, insect activity. You can see the coloured light coming through, and Tom had some of his books in there, The Resilient Garden. Again, an extraordinary garden, very ambitious, very interactive. Again, watching children interact with this garden was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Tom Massey's a very clever designer. And then the garden that, you know, almost everybody's talking about, the Sarah Price garden, sponsored by Nurture Landscapes. Nurture Landscape Garden won a gold medal. Now, this garden is based on Sir Cedric Morris, the painter, and his garden at Benton End in Suffolk. And what we're looking at here is some of the Benton irises. I think these are olive, the one that we're looking at, Benton iris olive, I'm pretty sure. This garden is you know, it's transporting so many people. There's a lot of talk about it. It's extremely beautiful. Sarah trained as a fine artist, and you can see it's very painterly, extremely beautiful. And if we look at some of the images here, what Sarah's really good at is allowing space. I think a lot of designers, when they do a Chelsea show garden or a show garden, almost go into panic mode and you know, plant up and cram it full of ideas and things and plants and structures. And what Sarah's, it's actually quite a big garden. It's 2 meters wider than normal. There were a couple of gardens that were slightly wider, so it's about 12 meters wide by about 20 meters long. So it feels very spacious, but it feels very light and airy. And what Sarah's done here is she's worked with a company called Studio Works, who are a company that they repurpose materials. They Sarah works with them a lot. She worked with them on her Maggie's garden in Southampton. So they, you know, they do a lot of research about the site. They look at reusing, they look at sustainability. So what Sarah has made these vessels, these water vessels here, and a lot of the pots, all the pots have been made reusing, you know, clay and different materials. So there's a wonderful message of sustainability. It's very light, it's open, it's airy, it's beautiful. The walls, which you can just about make out in the bottom image there, are straw bale construction with lime rendering. So the colours are slightly muted, and although they've been constructed at the same time, you know, they're drying out and the colours vary. So the colour palette is sort of repeated throughout. I mean, her use of colour is absolutely exceptional. It is phenomenal. And you can see here, I was lucky enough on the Saturday evening and the Sunday evening to be there at about 8 o'clock in the, well, 7:30, 8 o'clock, when the sun was going down, and it was just coming through and lighting up these irises. Just, it was sparkling. And in fact, I think on press day it was quite cloudy for most of the day and quite dull, and you know, the garden, when the sun comes through, the garden was transformed. I was there with a fantastic photographer called Eva Nemeth, who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, and we were just, you know, we were just getting overexcited basically. And I think Jason Ingram, another really well-known garden photographer, had left the site. He was halfway across Battersea Bridge. He knew that the sun had just come out, and he ran back because the photographers were running up and down Main Avenue, because this sparkly, sort of beautiful backlit sunshine, it just animates the gardens completely. But Sarah's garden is really, really captivating pretty much everybody. And here you can see what I mean about the colours of the walls, you know, the sort of slightly pinkish beige, you know, absolutely beautiful. And Sarah's kind of restraint, allowing space between plants, not just overplanting and filling everything up. So allowing movement, and the wonderful multi-stem trees that were supplied by Newwood down in Devon. You know, that again, you've got that wonderful sort of lightness and airiness to them, so you can get planting in underneath. So it's been a really you know, I think pretty much everybody has loved this garden completely. Again, lots of photographs, little details, little pots and vessels all planted up, the views through underneath the multi-stem trees, looking through, the irises shining in the background, absolutely amazing. And more pots, the aeoniums here against the wall. Yeah, just all of these wonderful sultry colors. And remember, it's sort of, you know, trying to evoke the paintings of Cedric Morris and the feeling of Benton End in Suffolk. Going off of Main Avenue, this is up into the Sanctuary Gardens. This was just a delightful garden by Tom Hoblin. Tom has done a Thursday garden chat for us, and we hope to do more with Tom in the future. This is his third garden for a company called Boodles, who I think are a jewellery company. And this is a smaller garden. It's probably about 10 by 10 metres. And it's about craft. It's about British craft. So it's celebrating craft. And you can probably just about make out the water feature on the right hand side. You can see sort of little drips. Well, it's been very cleverly designed, so it looks like rain's falling onto it. Well, it's actually not falling onto it, but it's sort of it's absolutely beautiful. And Tom won a silver gilt medal for this. And quite well deserved. I mean, absolutely stunning. So these sanctuary gardens are about half the size of the Main Avenue gardens, and in a slightly different area on the site. Back onto Main Avenue, this is Chris Beardshaw's garden. Again, this was sponsored by Project Giving Back. It's the Myeloma UK garden, and it's called A Life Worth Living. And Chris Beardshaw, I think I saw that he's won 15 gold medals at Chelsea. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal. His planting is extraordinary. And I put an image of this Aesculus pavia cohenii here that is it's one of those plants that a lot of gardens have a plant that everyone's asking about, and Chris very cleverly puts this on the side because it's so beautiful, and it's one of those things that everybody was sort of gravitating towards and asking questions about. I suppose the sad thing about some of these gardens is that you really need to go into them to appreciate them and appreciate the views. And of course, for those of you who've not been to Chelsea, you know, the public can't walk through the gardens, and that I think it's and it would be very difficult. Was it 145,000 visitors during the week? That would, you know, pretty much destroy a garden possibly. But the views you get from the garden looking out and through the garden are often so different to the views looking in, and it's sometimes a shame that the visitors can't see that, because you know, especially with Chris's garden, you know, this is sort of hidden towards the back of the garden, this water feature with water that's recirculating, lots of little details, and he's such a pro, Chris. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time, and his attention to detail is extraordinary. A few things that I wanted to sort of pick up on, because I'm going around. Obviously, I've done my judging. I'm walking around on press day, enjoying the show and enjoying you know, the fact that it's you know, my job is done, and I'm looking for ideas. Well, here are some hard landscaping details. I absolutely love these sort of clay walling details on the left-hand side. This was in the Italian garden in the sanctuary section. I just thought these were fantastic. The top right is in Charlotte and Hugo's garden that we'll talk about in a minute. That composite paving, like a terrazzo paving that they actually physically made themselves, and it's porous as well. But we'll talk about that garden in a second. And then the bottom right is, I just love the way that paving has been laid. So as a designer and as an educator, I'm going around looking for images and photographs and things that are actually I can use for teaching, but also use for inspiration. So it's a great source of all of that. And again, that's in Manoj Mal's garden, on the right-hand side, with the use of gravel and paving and pavers. And in fact, the little bits of paving are cut from the big bits of paving. So he was saying there's very little wastage there. The bottom image actually is in Sarah Price's garden again, and this was just demonstrating the different materials that they've made using different aggregates and clays and reclaimed materials. And again, you can just see how clever both Sarah and Local Works were to sort of limit that color palette. Everything was within that tonal color palette. And then the good old core 10, which you know is always evident in a lot of gardens, but I really like this little detail here. And then going back into the marquee. So, you know, I showed you those images of the marquee during build-up, and this is during when the show is actually happening. Now, I would say in the past few years, in the past 3 or 4 years, the marquee, to me, and this is speaking personally, has seemed a little bit empty and a little bit sort of lackluster. And that's to do with the volume of nurseries, the number of nurseries, the number of stands. You know, back in the good old days, 20, 30 years ago, you'd go into the marquee and you wouldn't be able to see the other side of the marquee because you just you couldn't see through. It was packed full. Now, it wasn't back up to that kind of standard this year, but it certainly felt a lot more vibrant, and there was a lot more in there, and I started to sort of feel like it used to, which is really good. So, you know, some of the stands like these delphiniums are extraordinary, and I love this Acer stand where they'd arranged all these acers into the shape of an Acer. I just thought this was wonderful, and of course, you know, they're judged just like everybody else, and scrutinized, and so, you know, they have to you know, to vie for the medals as well. But this was one of the most extraordinary stands in the marquee for me this year, was the mushroom stand by the Cayley brothers. Well, the company's called Cayley Brothers, but they're actually sisters, which is a little bit confusing. But so they've taken over their family company, and these are all mushrooms, and it was just extraordinary. I mean, they almost look like, well, they are works of art, but I mean, it's such an unusual and extraordinary thing to have right bang slap in the middle of the marquee. And of course it won a gold medal. I mean, you know, why wouldn't it? Also in the marquee, there are gardens, and the Plants First gardens, this was one of them. This is the Teapot Trust charity, Elsewhere Garden, designed by Susan Begg and Nicola Semple of Semple Begg, the Scottish contingent. And this was, again, sponsored by Project Giving Back. It's press day, so there are children on the garden. The Teapot Trust is a charity that uses art therapy for children to overcome issues and you know, for sort of rehabilitation. And this was just the most delightful garden. It really was vibrant and beautiful and interesting, and there was all sorts of magic going on. So you spoke into a little microphone and went, or made a noise into a microphone, and it made plants move. I mean, it was all kind of wired up. It was just extraordinary. And of course, you see the children here on press day, they're drawing and sketching. And the most extraordinary thing, Susan and Nicola, this was their first Chelsea garden, and they got a gold medal, which is amazing, to go in first time and get a gold medal. So it was, and again, it was one of those gardens, I'd go into the marquee and I'd wander around and I'd just find myself drawn to it. Absolutely wonderful. The other really lovely garden in the marquee was Harry Holding's garden. And this is for the School Food Matters charity, again sponsored by Project Giving Back. Harry won a silver gilt medal for this garden, and it was all about edibles, children, food, knowledge of food, and it was beautiful, delightful, lovely colours. You can see that Harry's got this very vibrant suit on that matches his garden. This huge wall at the back here, I think he said it was about 7 tons, with the writing on the wall that were quotes from children. And so it's all about children learning about where their food comes from. Really delightful. And another couple of images of Harry's garden, really. And I think it's his first garden at Chelsea too. Now we get on to, of course, the big winners. So this is the Horatio's garden, and this is Charlotte Harris and Hugo Bugg, again sponsored by Project Giving Back, and they won a gold medal, and then they also won Best in Show. Now, Horatio's Garden, for those of you who don't know, it's quite a well-known charity now. It is a charity that has a rather sad story, but it's named after a chap called Horatio who died in a horrible accident, was killed on a school trip, and his parents decided that they would set up spinal unit or gardens in spinal units around the country, and the first one was in Salisbury, in fact designed by Cleve West, in fact, and I want to say that there are about 5 or 6 now, but I think that's about right. Anyway, Charlotte and Hugo designed this garden for the Horatio's Garden charity, and this garden will be going to Sheffield, to the largest spinal unit in the country. And so, you know, I think it was, I think it's wonderful that the charity gets the recognition, and that this is going to Sheffield, which is significant as well. This is sort of standing back, and the reason Charlotte and Hugo were sitting down in that previous image is they were absolutely exhausted. That was on press day, and they were really exhausted. But the sort of main gist of the garden is, this is going to a spinal unit. This is going up to Sheffield. This is a garden that needs to be accessible for wheelchairs and also for beds, so that patients can be wheeled out. And so things are at wheelchair level or bed level, in terms of planting, in terms of interest in the garden. And if you look at this beautiful water feature, which I found I was mesmerized by, what you've got here, if you sort of look closely, are these dyes. Now, Sheffield was a steel town, still is sort of a steel town, but was a steel town, very famous for steel town. Those of you who've seen the Full Monty, you'll know about the sort of decline of the steel industry. So what you're looking at here are dyes that would have been used for making cutlery. So these beautiful, so this sort of reference to the history of Sheffield, and this beautiful water feature with the water just bubbling up, and it, absolutely stunning, absolutely amazing. And again, at sort of eye level if you're in a bed, or at arm level if you're in a wheelchair, so you can put your hand into the water. It's interactive, really, really very thoughtful. And then also in the garden, they had a series of these stone cairns, and the thinking behind this was cairns were used for sort of wayfinding in terms of your journey, and you know, finding your way through a journey through life, and I think that's the symbolism behind these cairns. Also the rose there, the mutabilis, which featured in a few gardens actually, it's almost thornless, and it's scented, and it's continual flowering. So you know, they're thinking about how this garden is going to be used, and the appropriate plants basically. But I think very, very well deserved. Also, as you can see in the back of the garden was this beautiful little building with shingle, wooden shingles on the side, and inside the building is a bed, windows on 3 sides, well actually on 4 sides, there's windows on each side, very open, very airy, so that you know, this will be in the garden in Sheffield, so patients can be, you know, wheeled out in their bed, spend time in the day bed or day room. That's, you know, especially if it's raining, or if, you know, it's not that warm, and so they can see the garden. The windows are at eye level, yeah, I think it very thoughtful garden. And again, I did find myself gravitating back to this garden. Hugo and Charlotte are really accomplished designers. Planting was absolutely beautiful, and you know, it's great, as I say, great recognition for the charity. Now, just to finish up a little bit here, I mean, Press Day is a big thing at Chelsea, and the Chelsea pensioners that you can see here in their wonderful red jackets, and you can just see the hospital behind. So that's Royal Hospital Road, which is the Royal Hospital where the Chelsea pensioners live, and they come out in force on Press Day, looking very magnificent in their red jackets, and wandering through the gardens. Now, I just thought I'd finish with this slide because I was taking a picture of this Chelsea pensioner, but can you see who's photobombing the picture at the back? Possibly. I don't know if any of you can recognize her, but there's a clue in the title of the slide. I think Wendy's got it. So yeah, Press Day is a strange day, I always find, at Chelsea, because it's kind of planet celebrity. You know, everybody, all the celebrities get invited. It's not my favorite day. It's a kind of strange day, really, but of course it's lovely to, and I feel very privileged to be there, because you can move around and you can go onto the gardens. But it is a little bit weird because there's nobody normal. Everybody's a sort of superstar, and of course the older you get, the fewer superstars you know, all these people being photographed, I haven't got a clue who they are. But anyway, so that was a little romp through my my selection of Chelsea gardens that I feel that I was moved by, really, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there are so many more gardens, but really that was my sort of selection for you. So I'm going to come out of screen share, and if anybody's got, I think I've got chat here. Let's see if we've got questions. Okay, so yeah, the Korean garden looks the Korean garden was extraordinary. What criteria have to be fulfilled to be judged as poor? Well, that's sort of self-explanatory, really, Ulla. I have to say there were very few. I don't think we had anything in my lot that were poor, but you know, I think that sort of speaks for itself. I mean, if the plants are really bad. All right, somebody's saying if they drop off, the mushroom display is very intriguing. Yes, Rachel, sustainability. There is a criteria for sustainability. In fact, the RHS every year, the RHS are upping the sustainability factor for each of the gardens, and so every garden at the show has to have a life. It doesn't just go into a skip. It has to be sustainable. And you have to prove the provenance of every material that you have put into the garden. So yes, to answer your question, there is. Sanctuary garden. What determines a sanctuary garden? Well, it is about the size, but I think it is also about the fact that they're small and they are literally more of a sanctuary. They all have this sort of feel about them. It's hard to describe. And in fact, I think the whole show this year had a feeling of sort of well-being and care and so I think most of the gardens, I think any garden, a good garden, you would call a sanctuary, but I think because of the size, the criteria for the best of show and who decides, well, it is a bit of an addition. It is a bit of a, when the numbers get added up for each of the criteria, that determines the medal. That determines it. So it's also a numerical score, but it's also the sort of, it determines what category of medal, whether it's bronze, silver, gilt, or gold. And so best in show technically is the garden with the most highest points. So it is literally how that works. It isn't just, drawn out of a hat. Okay, so I love it as an installation, but not sure. I wasn't sure, Rachel, which one you're talking to. So I love it as an installation, but not sure if it could be seen as a garden. Looks more conceptual, like a theatre set. Could do with a project giving back at Northern shows. Yeah, I mean, project giving back are just extraordinary. Yeah, I hope, and I think probably what they're hoping is that project giving back, it won't just stop. I don't think they are the sort of people that would just stop, but I think what they're trying to do is create this as a business model, basically, going forward. So let's hope that will happen. Mark saying, I thought Centrepoint Garden was incredibly atmospheric, couldn't hear the sound from the edge, and I'm probably, during a public day, it's probably harder to hear the sound. It was beautiful and challenging horticulturally in a good way, and just as precise as the more traditional gardens. Absolutely agree. I think whatever the brief for the garden, whatever the design, whatever the designer is trying to do, it's the level to which they've done that. It's, how well have they done it? And it was just masterful. Well, I think they were all masterful. For me, like I say, I was very relieved I wasn't judging on Main Avenue this year, because I think I saw the group of judges at about 5 o'clock, and they looked absolutely done in. I think it's a hard job. Rachel saying, had no idea children were banned, would have thought the RHS. Absolutely. Let's hope that changes, because, as we all know, it sounds like a cliche, but they are the future. And it really filled my heart with joy to see so many children scampering around on press day. Maybe what the RHS should do is have a children's day where, that's the day you go with children. I really do. So Ulla saying, Cleve West garden seems sophisticated. Been to the Booga today. They've also incorporated a lot of rubble. Yeah, it was sophisticated, but it was also raw, I think. I think photographs obviously don't do these gardens credit. You have to kind of stand in them, and the more you stand and look, the more you see. I suppose the sophistication is there because of the quality of finish and the, making it look like it's always been there. That's very sophisticated and not very easy to do. Mags is saying, spookily, I visited the church in the City of London today where Chad Vara's first telephone for Samaritans is on display. Oh, that's amazing. I got quite emotional actually speaking to Felicity, because yeah, I mean, I'll get emotional now if I talk about it. Mark saying, Sarah Price's garden was sensational, the best I've seen for years. I think from the public perspective, I think it is going to be one of the most popular gardens. It's so utterly beautiful to look at. Lots of, everyone's saying about Sarah's garden. Can the Ulla's asking, can the designers decide which size their garden will be? Well, yes and no, because if you apply to do a Main Avenue garden, they're 22, I think, by 12. If it's a sanctuary, I think it's 10 by 10. So you don't really get to choose the size or the site. You get to choose the category you're going into. Chris Beardshaw's planting opposite to Sarah's, so much packed in. Yeah, there was a lot packed in. I went to Chelsea in person once and prefer watching it on TV. Yeah, I think you do see more on TV. And honestly, I know I spent 3 days there, but I see things on TV and I think, where was that? I never saw that. Where, because, I also know that I was being magnetically drawn to the gardens that I've shown you, whereas I should have been spending more time, like half an hour in front of each garden, but I was just being drawn to these gardens. And also, they're temporary. You just want to stand and look and make the most of every minute. Tanya's saying, I was just about to say that too, that Annie, about one's experience of the garden being affected by whether you can actually be in the garden. A lot of details you've been able to see for yourself are hard to enjoy from the sidelines. Yeah, it's true. Although I think if you're designing, I think as a designer going into Chelsea, you are thinking about the public. I think you are thinking about what they're seeing. And I think also if the garden is too inward looking, that could be marked down because, you're not, it's too hidden away really, basically. Mark's asking, do you think there was less paving this year? Yeah, I think there was actually. And what paving there was, a lot of it was repurposed, handmade. So I think there is a move towards a more sustainable look at how we pave and where we get our paving from. Mushrooms fabulous. I wondered if it was judged best in show because it might have been the only garden in which has a full light. No, Rachel, they are all gardens going on somewhere. So Rachel's wondering why perhaps the Horatio's garden, they all have a life after Chelsea. They all have to have a life after Chelsea. That's part of the criteria. Excellent, thank you, Cleves. Are school groups allowed? School groups were allowed on press day, but during show week, as far as I know, are not allowed. So I just hope the RHS do change their mind on this, because I think it's I think it's really short-sighted. I think really. So that, I think I've worked my way through all the questions. If anyone's got any other or last-minute questions, please. Yeah, so I'm so glad you missed things too. I see things on BBC. Yeah, it's impossible to get around Chelsea, I think, unless you're there every day or week, and you just maybe concentrate on one category. Then it is really, really hard to just take it all in. And yeah, so that's kind of my sort of roundup, really. I wondered whether anyone would ask about gardens having meanings, because sometimes nobody's mentioned this. The fact that we've got these gardens, not all of them, but all the project giving back are linked to a charity, and so that therefore there are meanings and symbols and messages in the gardens. Now, I don't know whether, people feel that is important or not important, but actually, I think it's just like going to an art gallery. You can stand in front of a painting and you can try and work out what it's all about, or you can just look at it and say, I love it, or I don't like it, and I'm going to move on. But I do think the meanings are important, and I do think that having these charities is important. I think the project giving back have helped to promote the charities when the charities have been, really suffering because of COVID, in terms of people having less money to give to charity, less exposure. So personally, I don't mind the fact that the gardens have meanings and symbolism. I don't know how people feel about that. But, like I say, I think you just have to be kind of grown up about it and say, I want to know what this is all about, or I just want to stand and look at it and enjoy it. So I think, personally, that's kind of how I would approach it. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the Samaritans by talking to Felicity, by talking to Darren. And, there are things that I didn't know about the charity that were extraordinary. So I think, it's all a learning process. Mark saying, I think the meaning has to be important as it must inform the brief. Yeah, I agree. I think, yeah, definitely. No, great. So I hope that was of interest. I don't know how many people will have gone to Chelsea this week. I know some of you are on the other side of the Atlantic, so it's a little bit hard, but you can watch it on the BBC, hopefully. It's just a show. It just happens for a week and then it's gone. But it is kind of the pinnacle, I think, of the show garden. It's the pinnacle of our industry, and I think it's from our point of view, it's a great coming together of people. It's wonderful because you see people that you don't see from year to year. You get to talk to people, you get to discuss things, and so personally, I get a lot from it. I feel very honoured and privileged to be asked to be a judge. And I have to say, with anything that to do with judging, I don't find it an enjoyable process, but I find it an interesting process. I don't think judging other people's work is you can take enjoyment from it, but I think it's incredibly interesting. And also talking about your values and how you think somebody has produced something and done it the way that they said they were going to do or not. And I think for me personally, when I'm going around Chelsea, when I'm doing that Saturday afternoon walk around, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is Chelsea Flower Show. This is the most important flower show in the world. It has to be right up there. It has to be good. It has to be better than good. And so that's always in the back of my mind. This is not a country show where it's quite cute and there's little chinks in the armor. It has to be, this is Chelsea, this is promoting the top in horticulture and plants. But anyway, if you're going, have an amazing time. And don't forget People's Choice, which actually, it's just closed. The judging closes at 7, so who knows who's going to win People's Choice. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, so obviously the gardens get judged, and then the RHS set up this thing called the People's Choice, where anyone can go onto the website and vote for your own personal choice. It'll be interesting to see. I've got my thoughts about who it might be. Don't know. We'll just have to see. But it's announced tomorrow night. And like I say, it's 7 o'clock, which is just gone. That the judging is closed. I've voted, and I'll give the game away a little bit. I voted for one of the gardens that featured in my talk tonight. So, yeah. Anyway, listen, everybody, thanks for joining. Thank you for letting me tell you what I got from Chelsea. And if you're going, have a wonderful time. And if you want to do it, think about Project Giving Back. Think about applying to them. So because it's a wonderful way in. It's a wonderful way of getting in through the door and getting sponsorship. So yeah. Anyway, there we go, and we've managed without Noel this week, so there we go. That's all to the good, really. Anyway, listen, have a good week, everyone. Enjoy the show, and hopefully see you soon. See you next week. Okay, take care. Bye, everyone. Bye bye. Thank you so much.